Usually to speak personally creates a sense of personal intimacy. That's how you get to know people, by speaking personally. You speak about yourself, they speak about themselves. And that's what creates a sense of mutuality and trust and intimacy. And then if there's vulnerability, it creates even more feeling of trust. So you all should notice that even though you all don't know each other very well, some of you know each other, but a lot of you don't know each other, there's a beautiful feeling of togetherness. Even though you have not been sharing personal stories, personal feelings, personal thoughts. So I noticed, this is the whole point, I noticed many years ago during these extended periods of 10 days or more when people would not be speaking personally. Again and again I found that people who never met each other, knew nothing about each other personally, admitted feeling more intimate, feeling a greater sense of intimacy, oneness, trust, ease of being, relaxation, with people they never met before. More profound sense of oneness and intimacy, love, with people that they have no personal experience with. Just because you stop speaking personal, stop being personal, stop acting through the personal lens, through the personal portal, you begin to feel more deeply into life, and you begin to feel more, you experience greater intimacy, which is completely counterintuitive, and it goes against everything we've been taught to think about love and oneness and intimacy, vulnerability, transparency, right? So this process perspective teaches us to contemplate the nature of the cosmic process that's producing the experience we're having right now, to begin to think of ourselves as our experience is being produced by this process rather than existing apart from it or outside of it. This helps us to awaken to a much deeper sense of who we are as the whole universe. So usually we think of ourselves as, in some stupid, uneducated, ignorant way, we think of ourselves as existing outside the creative process, outside the evolutionary process, in some kind of independent world space that's disconnected from the whole. Right? This is unconscious, deeply conditioned cognitive behavior. It's how we've been taught to think about ourselves. How we end up thinking is self-existing, independent entities that exist outside the cosmos somehow. Right? Does that make any sense? Because when we begin to pay attention, we begin to study that the cosmos, the whole universe, has created the conditions that make it possible for us to have the temporary experience of relative integration we're having right now through this body, mind, and personality. This is what I like to say, give people the mantra, I am the energy and intelligence that created the universe, awakening to itself and realizing itself through the body, mind, personality of Andrew or any one of us. It's a different way to think about who you are. And it's more honest, it's more authentic, it's more true to reality. That this body is a temporary emergent phenomena, not going to last for very long, and it's producing the conditions that make it possible for you to have the cognitive and emotional experience you're having right now. But you don't actually exist outside the process. The process has created the conditions to make it possible for you to have the temporary experience of being a separate human being that you're having right now. So we are the whole process, giving rise to these conditions. It's more of an authentic picture of reality. So the process perspective encourages us to think about the nature of this process as part of our daily practice. And one thing that I've encouraged people to do for many years is through the practice of contemplation and introspection, learn how to stop compulsively personalizing everything you think and feel. So we've been taught to compulsively personalize what we believe in our ignorance is my experience of thought, my experience of feeling, my experience of lust, my experience of fear, my experience of doubt. I'm having a particular feeling. And if you start to think about it, it's very impersonal. It's part of the human experience. We're all more or less having exactly the same experience with slight variations between me and you and someone else. But it's basically the same experience in all of its glory and mundanity. It's kind of shocking how lacking in authentic uniqueness we really are. We're more or less the same person having the same experience, more or less. I'm exaggerating to make a point, but it's an important point. So what I encourage people to do is to scrutinize or to contemplate the nature of your own experience when you remember during the day, when you have a disturbing thought or a disturbing feeling. Scrutinize it and ask, is this really as personal and as real as it appears to be? Or is everyone else having the similar kinds of feelings and thoughts that you're having for similar kinds of reasons? Going through the same drama of a separate existence that you are? And the answer is yes. It's unbearable when you think about it. This will help you to wake up. It's another way to help to wake up from the nightmare of this separate existence and the nightmare of the ego. Because the illusion of a separate existence is easy to penetrate if you stay with it. If you don't pay attention, most people aren't paying attention, so if you don't pay attention, it's easy to get lost in the ego's dream. But if you start paying attention and you penetrate the walls of the ego's dream, you start finding cracks. And when you see a crack, you see through the illusion temporarily for a few seconds, and you go, oh my God, it's not real. A little scary. I thought it was real. But if you keep paying attention, you'll start seeing more and more cracks and start seeing through the illusion of a separate you. The illusion of a separate you is as foolish as the illusion of a separate somebody else. We're all having the same experience. It's all the same dream. So this is one form of contemplation that helps us to transcend the ego. We're part of an impersonal process. The creative process is not a personal process. It's an impersonal cosmic process. It has no ego in it until we show up. This is something you just have to pay attention to every day for a few minutes. When you remember, contemplate especially when you're suffering. When you're suffering, it's good to pay attention to what you're experiencing. When you experience happiness and joy, pay attention to what you're experiencing and say, what am I actually experiencing right now? Is it what it appears to be, or is this just a reflection of something much bigger? And where you're all intelligent enough to do this kind of reflection, just most people just don't do it. Nobody told them to do it. Nobody taught them about the fact that they're part of a process. Their experience is being produced by this process that's creating the conditions to make it possible to see and feel the kind of experience that we're having. What's very interesting is when you stop acting from the personal part of yourself, which is the separate ego. When you stop speaking, walking and talking and thinking from that part of yourself, you start to feel better. And not only do you start to feel better, you experience more oneness and intimacy with other people that you've never met. I feel more intimate. I realize I feel more intimate with people I've never met here than I do with my husband or my wife, my children, my best friends. Isn't this fascinating? Because from my point of view, if that's true, and it is true, we've got to think about how we're doing with our lives. If what I'm pointing out is absolutely true, then that should have an influence on the life choices that we're making. Because the question you have to ask yourself, the famous question that Ramana brought up, who am I? Stop speaking and acting from the personal dimension of who I am. This produces a greater sense of intimacy, vulnerability, authenticity, transparency, happiness. Happiness has how much more happiness? Why don't I drop this personal trip? Very few people do that. But I'm just trying to give you a relatively objective picture of the reality of the human experience. If you're sensitive and thoughtful enough and attentive enough, you'll see what I'm saying is true. This is not just an opinion. So why I asked all of you not to speak between the sessions, because I wanted you to have this kind of experience so we could talk about it together. Because once you know what it is, most of you are just discovering for the first time, once you know what it is, then you say, well, this is the state of consciousness, this is the kind of relationship to life I want to experience all the time, because I experience so much more authenticity, realness, transparency, meaning, purpose, love, and oneness, and non-dual oneness. So it seems that this divided self-egoic personality, as magnificent as it is from an evolutionary point of view, as complex as it is, keeps us apart from depth, spiritual depth, metaphysical depth. The depth of reality keeps us very separate from it. Right? So we have to learn how to think big about reality. And start feeling better automatically. This is why eventually, when we're mature enough to do it, which for some people will take many years, we have to drop this obsessive fascination with our personal story. But it's the obsessive thinking about me in my story, year in and year out. False sense of self, which is a separate self existing outside the cosmos. It's constantly thinking about it, the story of its life, which is a false story anyway, because it's a picture of a separate existence, which it never really was in the first place. So what are we doing anyway? It's self-delusion. So all of the constant thinking about me and my story outside the context of the totality of reality is making our experience worse, causing us to suffer more, not less, and we don't even know it. But it's compulsive self-concern. We can all learn how to do that less, so that's why I keep on repeating these teachings over and over and over and over and over again about learning what it means to have no relationship. I'm talking about our salvation. I'm pointing out your potential for your own salvation in this life. And if you put what I'm saying into practice, you'll find out that it actually works, which will give you confidence. Don't take my word for anything I say. Don't take my word for it. Put it into practice and see for yourself. It makes sense. But when you see yourself compulsively thinking about yourself, stop. You're driving yourself nuts. And I'm sure you're driving other people nuts too. People who talk about themselves all the time are boring to be around. I'm being brutally honest. It's unbearable, blah, 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 blah. It's not interesting. On a personal level, none of us are that interesting. That's not what's interesting about any of us. It's not the personal stuff. It's the deeper dimensions of who we are. That's what's interesting and compelling. But the story itself, once you've heard it, is kind of boring, even if it has some interesting parts in it. So explore these issues for yourself and see what happens. Everything I'm saying is very simple now. It's kind of obvious once you get it. So the intimacy you experience in these retreats is coming from the best part of you, the best part of all of us. And if you want to live a happy, liberated, enlightened life, you have to gain access to this part of yourself in a way that's solid and steady. That's what all the spiritual practices are before. That's what all the Dharma's for. Show us how to do that. But the simple experience of intimacy you're having is the foundation of the ground of liberation. You feel it for yourself. You could take this a lot deeper. I'm not saying this is everything. You're experiencing the foundation of the potential for your own liberation grounded in a deeper experience of reality. So the implications are profound. They're very exciting and they work. So the reason that I'm so interested in contemplating the sum totality of reality as a process is because when we awaken to the evolutionary perspective, it's the first thing you realize is that the universe is a process. Life is a process. Manifest reality is a process. It's one process. It's one event happening on multiple levels at the same time, and that's become very fascinating. It's just very interesting to suddenly see all the complexity of this process. And as I said, how the process creates the conditions that make it possible for you, body, mind, and personality, to emerge and have the experience that it's having right now. And what's even more interesting is the experience you're having right now is just as what's possible up to a point when you start adjusting the dials, taking responsibility for the creative part of all this, you can start having a big influence on what you experience and how you experience it. You get my point? We're not just merely ignorant, unconscious, blind, passive experiencers of being part of a process. When you wake up, you realize that you're part of a process that you can actually have an effect on. So when you realize, oh, I'm not just a passive participant here, but I can be an active participant in co-creating the experience that I am having and we're having, then it gets very interesting. So anybody who's interested in evolution is interested in the process perspective. It liberates you from his unconscious ideas and beliefs about a separate existence. And inherent in that is your own potential for liberation at the level of direct experience. So as I said, when you remember during the day, over the next weeks, if you have a few minutes, Remember, you are the process as a whole. That's producing the experience you're having. Just spend a few minutes on it. You don't have to spend a lot of time. Just keep reminding yourself every day. It will become more and more natural, more and more obvious to you. I am the energy and intelligence that created the universe and is creating the universe right now, awakening to itself through the body, mind, personality of my very own self. It's a different picture. So if two people can do that together, two people can do that at the same time, the process can start relating to itself impersonally. So one part of the process starts engaging with the other part of the process. The process starts begins a relationship with itself. So it's non-dual because it's a relationship with itself. Not the relationship with another, it's a relationship with itself. So it's a non-dual relationship. And it's a lot more fun and a lot more interesting for the process to have a relationship with itself than two egos to have a relationship with themselves. I'm telling you. But the challenge is if it's really going to be the process of relating to itself, the destroyer of all happiness, which is the ego, the negative ego, has to be kept outside. That's the hard part. The ego's a party pooper. Because the ego says, Andrew, you've been speaking for an hour now, but you haven't been speaking about me, my story, my needs, my pain, my suffering, my desire to be happy and to be acknowledged and seen and loved. I'm a good person too. You haven't said anything about me. This must be part of your shadow, Andrew. So in this metaphysical context of enlightenment, we're learning how to flex a certain intellectual muscle, which is learning how to see reality through a non-relative or absolute lens, which is at first it's difficult to understand what that means. So you have to experiment with looking at a particular phenomenon or particular questions through a relative lens. I'm talking about your own mind, and an absolute lens. So you learn how to think in these ways. You have to train yourself. It's a different kind of consciousness and a different kind of cognition when you look through an absolute lens versus a relative lens. And when you look through these two lenses, that's when spirit appears. You start to see spirit sneaks through the space there. And you're able to hold these two truths. Inside yourself, you start to see this mystery of the presence of spirit will begin to appear. It's been there all the time, but now because you're holding these two truths very profoundly in your own mind, the revelation of spirit, non-dual spirit begins to appear. It's very interesting. And when you understand how this works through this kind of inquiry, then look at your life. Question the way you're living. The nature of your relationships. You don't have to talk to other people about it if you don't want to. You keep this very private and secret between yourself and yourself. You don't have to scare anybody or hurt anybody or hurt yourself. But just start to question things with courage. See what you come up with. See what you find. And just to finish this part, the reason that many of you are experiencing deeper happiness is simply because you stopped speaking from ego. And we've been concentrating on higher dimensions of reality, and these two things help to just make us happy. And you concentrate on the Dharma, profound philosophical and metaphysical questions. You stop thinking about the small self. You start to feel very happy, naturally, spontaneously, automatically, which in and of itself is very interesting. So if that's true, and it is true, I'll tell you what you should be spending more time doing. When you understand the Dharma and you practice it, the question of how to be happy is not a mystery anymore. It becomes pretty straightforward. Living a conscious life. Now, cosmic conscience, which is the last one, more or less the same point, is what it means to become a bodhisattva. And when I speak about becoming a bodhisattva, I'm not speaking about taking a vow, taking a bodhisattva vow, or cultivating a higher intention. It's coming to a point where it becomes apparent to you very naturally, spontaneously, and living for the highest reasons, living for spirit. This becomes your only option left for you. You can't do anything else. Everything else, as I said, the other day starts to disappear. And your vision becomes everything falls away, and you start seeing a straight line to eternity inside your own consciousness. Everything else is gone. And then it becomes all about consciousness and what's possible with consciousness. And you become interested in that, anything and everything that can support that. But beyond that, you don't have any interest anymore. It's not because you shouldn't have interest, not because it's bad to have interest, it's just at a certain point it falls away. So there is a awakening to the call of the Spirit itself. Because as I have been saying in my teachings, consciousness in a mysterious way delights in its own self-recognition. Your consciousness and my consciousness itself, delights in its own self-recognition. So it seems it's become apparent to me that consciousness is not, I can't explain this to you except I can just tell you what my experience is. You take it or leave it. But consciousness, it seems to me, is not without motive. And rationally, what I'm saying makes no sense. And I can't explain it. And I can't prove it to you. But it seems to me, from my own limited experience, that consciousness is not free from motivation. Doesn't make sense. It seems to me, and I've experienced this many times, that doesn't mean it's true. It's my experience. The consciousness wants to be recognized, to be seen, to be acknowledged, to be revered, to be honored. Consciousness is not merely a passive observer of Ramana's true self. Consciousness, in my experience, is not merely the passive witness of experience. There seems to be another quality of consciousness which seems to have desire of some kind. Once again, I can't prove what I'm saying is true to you, but I have experienced this many times. The consciousness I have discovered in my own experience is not free from motivation. So there seems to be, I'm saying seems to be, I'm trying to be very cautious in what I'm saying because I don't really know the ultimate validity of what I'm saying beyond my own experience. But it seems that consciousness at a certain point is not without motive, which includes your consciousness, if you're sensitive enough to become aware of it. So the universe, the interior of the universe, which is consciousness, is not free from motivation. This is the motivation for the evolution of consciousness, higher becoming. This is what the universe seems to want for itself, not just for you, but for itself. It seems to be an inherent interior motive of the universe itself, which, as I've been saying, is unbelievably thrilling. The universe wants us to wake up, be more conscious. There's a pull, there's a natural and inherent pull in the universe towards consciousness. The interior of the universe is not a flat or static dimension of reality, but there's some mysterious God force active in the ground of the universe that wants more, which is inconceivably beautiful and absolutely life-affirming, spirit-affirming, existence-affirming, God-affirming. So when any one of us wakes up to this truth in a profound way, we awaken to what I call cosmic conscience, because that experience of feeling the mysterious, we could call it desire inherent in consciousness itself for greater depth, becomes our own personal preference. When you make the shift from a personal identity to a cosmic identity, you begin to feel this pull in yourself. And it's very impersonal. It's very subtle, but very profound. Isn't it beautiful? I'm very moved by it. Now, I said I can't prove it to you. So I can't be sure that, well, this is not part of my own narcissistic delusion. But I don't think it is. I'm just trying to have integrity as a speaker to tell you I can't prove it. But it's a big secret. Most people don't know this. So in my teaching of evolutionary enlightenment, I'm equating the ancient idea of awakening to this bodhisattvic motivation, which is a loving, transpersonal motivation towards all sentient life, to awaken to enlightened awareness. I'm replacing that with what I'm describing to you, which is this awakening to this deepest interior dimension of the cosmos, which always already is seeking for greater consciousness and greater knowledge. And when this happens to you, this is when your vision becomes very deep but very narrow, in the positive sense of what it means. It becomes very exclusive. Not because it should be, but it's just that's what it is at that point. That's when you're living for the universe. Not because you want to at that point, but because you have no choice. And the fact that you have no choice at that point is what liberates you. Not that you have many choices, but the fact that you only have one choice is your liberation now. So that's what cosmic conscience means. These 5 principles are very interesting because the first one begins with, I want to be free from myself more than anything else. So it's all about you at the beginning, right? And at the end, the 5th tenet, it's all about the whole universe. It's not about you anymore. You're just a function. You're not the point. So if people practice these 5 principles with sincerity and earnestness, as you evolve, it'll affect you in a very profound way. And you stick with it, but you got to stick with it. You have to stay in it. For a long period of time, you have to stay in it. You have to stay in deep water. Well, I've been living the spiritual life very intensively for 5 years, and I think I need a little bit of a samsara break. I'm going to Goa, baby. When I was coming to India in 1984, 85, first time doing Vipassana retreats in Bodh Gaya. After these retreats, because everybody had been sitting quietly for 10 days, everybody was very open and vulnerable and beautiful. So we were talking about, yeah, man, how long is it going to take to get enlightened, and who's going to become a monk? And everybody was very loving with each other and very encouraging. And then I had the experience many times of meeting some of these guys a week later, 10 days later, 2 weeks later, a month later, and they just come from the beach. And they started smoking dope again, they started drinking. They had gotten in a few relationships, and they weren't on fire anymore. It's like I brought up the subject, what about the enlightenment part of it? They couldn't hardly remember what they were so excited about. It's a true story. They lost the plot that easily, that quickly. So for most people, it takes a tremendous amount of intensity to begin to wake up a little bit. Like 10 days of meditating 10 to 12 hours a day is a lot, it's a heavy load. But that's what it takes for people to wake up a little bit. But our conditioning is so overwhelming, we just forget all the time. So it takes so much metaphysical pressure to squeeze a little bit of light in there. But I've seen this happen to so many people, where they wake up a little bit and they get excited about spiritual potential, really deeply, profoundly excited. And then you feel somebody else is experiencing the same kind of intimacy with them that you're experiencing with me and with each other. Same kind of impersonal love. That comes from the love of spirit, the recognition that spirit is primary. Then they got distracted by samsara, by sex and drugs and just stupid stuff. They weren't bad people. They didn't do anything terrible. They were just stupid and careless with their own capacity for awakening. And if you're a little bit careless, it all disappears in a minute. That's why if you live the spiritual life, you have to have discipline, just to protect yourself. And if you meet somebody that says, oh, this is easy, they don't know what they're talking about. It's easy if you succeed, whatever that means. But unless you succeed, it's not necessarily going to be easy. So it's better to expect it to be hard and not worry about it. But for most of us, it is very difficult to sustain this state of awakeness through all the ups and downs of life. If you're living the teachings earnestly, it takes 5 years to get a basic intellectual understanding of the teachings. It takes 10 years to understand what it means to live them. I'm not trying to scare anybody, but I'm just telling you the truth. So 5 years to understand them. If you're working with them every week, take about 5 years to get a general intellectual grasp of all the teachings. But it takes 10 years to understand what it means to live them, because what it means to live them is a very big deal, very challenging and subtle and profound and all demanding. It's very funny when people hear that they lose interest. It'll take that long. I'm not interested. I want the quick path to enlightenment. There ain't no shortcuts. So you get a feeling for cosmic conscience. It really means staying awake to the deepest truth, to the best of your ability, and being grounded in that truth. So a good way to kind of psychoanalyze yourself, I'm just thinking out loud now, is to spend some time thinking about personal stuff that really bothers you. And if it's very personal, consider that maybe it's not half as important as you think it is, just because it's so personal. Doesn't mean there's not relative truth in it. Remember, people who fall in love, beautiful. We end up hating each other's guts. So I don't trust all this in love stuff anymore. Because on the other side of all that passion is hatred and contempt, the worst kinds of feelings. And it seems that these intense emotions that can be so intoxicating can be very dangerous and not trustworthy. The Dharma is only for very mature people. I think it's not good to hear this stuff if you're too young. Because it's better to hear the Dharma after you've lived long enough to live through some of these illusions for yourself. Otherwise, you'll never believe it. But you need to suffer through the agony of seeing this horrible truth about these illusions for yourself enough times that you're vulnerable to another perspective. But love is a very challenging emotion, just for the very same reason that I'm speaking about it now. If love and hate are so intimately related to each other, you have to be very cautious about what we're getting into. And I think there's a much deeper kind of connection, I think, than is typically called love, which is what I've been pointing to all morning, which is a kind of intimacy that's self-arising, coming together in these deeper truths, which are independently self-existing, whether you share them with someone else or not. I think they're much more reliable in the long run, much safer, much more trustworthy. So you remember, your ego likes to have these intense experiences because they feel so exciting. There's nothing immoral about experiencing this kind of personal intensity, but you have to realize it's not without cost. Potentially it's not without an enormous emotional cost also. You have to be careful. Someone who was helping me at one point told me, Andrew, you have to protect your heart. It's true for all of us, we have to protect our hearts. So be careful with what you're doing with your emotions, and the kind of people that you're spending time with and who you trust. But you have to protect yourself, protect your heart. Because suffering is real, suffering is intense and gets too strong. We can lose touch with our own higher inclinations and become cynical and nihilistic and small-minded and selfish. You see the kind of maturity you have to embrace the Dharma? I mean, this is not for kids. Isn't life a big game where I can just have a lot of fun, have a lot of adventures for me? I know it looks that way, kiddo, but it's much deeper than that. So she said, Andrew, you have to protect your heart. And I realized in that moment how much she cared about me. It was a very powerful moment for me. She just was saying, stop, everything's okay. So we all have to protect our hearts. But we also have to be vulnerable. Find a way to both. So if you're listening to what I'm saying this morning, you should be getting some glimpses or some insights into what it would mean to live beyond that which is personal. You should be getting a sense of it, a feeling of what I'm pointing to. And please understand, when you live beyond the personal, or you attempt to live beyond the personal, because nobody can do it completely, you're not giving up anything. That's important. And how many years will it take you to realize that? If you live beyond the personal, you're not giving up anything important. And if what I'm saying is true, it has profound implications for the life we choose to live and the way we choose to live it. So I want you to struggle with these distinctions I'm making, find out for yourself, is what I'm saying true or not? Don't take my word for it. If you've been brought up in a world where the personal is all there is, you're not to blame. It's not your fault. But if you're a sensitive person, you don't want to live a life where you're suffering all the time. Most people are suffering so much. Jesus Christ. It's terrible. And if we suffer too much, we all have limits, no matter who we are. Nobody can bear endless suffering forever. We all have limits and we can all break, which is the truth. So this is why we have to learn to protect our hearts and make choices that will reduce the possibility of us suffering more, not less. You have to be very mature to make these kind of choices, not lost in the illusions of this stupid, materialistic, crass, modern, postmodern culture is fucking our minds up with. Most of us are trapped in other people's minds and other people's ideas. It's terrible. It's absolutely horrendous. It destroys life. Even if you're physically alive, you'll be spiritually dead. You won't know what to do with yourself anymore, which is how a lot of us are feeling anyway. So it's serious. But understanding what I'm saying this morning is outrageous, audacious. Most people go, what is he talking about? I heard he was crazy. now you know it's true. I heard him myself. He's totally nuts. He kept insisting that the personal was an illusion. Oh, he must be crazy. I'm just repeating, what I'm saying is these are hard truths. They're hard truths because they're so countercultural. So because they're hard truths, they will instinctively seem strange to you. Just because you haven't probably heard them before or haven't thought about them before. So they're hard truths to cognize, to kind of grasp, to experience, to realize. But they're important. If you want to truly become autonomous, have real agency, you have to embrace these hard truths and allow yourself to change. You're not going to change in a way that's going to please most people. If you become a truly autonomous, self-authoring, evolving human being, you're going to stand apart from everybody else. Not because you don't love them, but because you're not blind, following along unconsciously like everyone else is. Which will make you a little bit lonely. But it's better to be lonely than to be a fool, right? And it's one thing that's been becoming more obvious to me over the last 6 months, as we're all facing this meta crisis together. And nobody knows the answers right now. A lot of very good people are struggling to figure all this out. But the answers are not very obvious to anybody. So there's nobody that has the answer. Nobody's going to save you. Nobody's going to save you. Nobody's going to save us from ourselves. So we've got to figure this out on our own or together. But no one's going to save you. At this point in our history, the challenges we're all facing are too complex for anybody to have figured them out yet. They're too big, they're too complex, it's too confusing. The chaos is too new, it's too overwhelming, it's all too fast. So don't think that anybody's figured this out already. Nobody has. It's not good or bad, it's just the truth. It will give you more confidence in yourself if you let it in. Everything I'm speaking about is all about coming together as one. When I came to India, I went to Shivananda Ashram for the first time. I went to the satsang. There was a famous Swami there named Swami Krishnananda who was giving a talk. And I didn't understand what he was talking about. At the end of the talk, he said, there's a drone. He said, there's a drone. Can you hear it? It's the sound of God. Can you hear the sound? Can you hear the sound? It's saying, come together, come together, come together. In unity there is strength, come together. And I never heard anybody say anything like that before, because I was on the spiritual path for my own personal, separate liberation. I never thought of this whole idea of coming together. So this idea of coming together for the sake of what's possible entered into my soul at that moment in 1984. See how beautifully we're loving and trusting each other. Some of us don't even know each other, and we haven't even talked about it. So the way it works is if we agree on the motive, to come together for the sake of liberating higher consciousness from all of us, and come together, we transcend ego in such a way that makes real, intimate communication possible, then everything's possible. We become the new being together as one. My attitude in terms of the new being and exactly what it's capable of is yet to be seen. Aurobindo didn't do it. And we began to do it, but then we messed it up. So the thing is, I'm very interested in that, but I don't feel that the emergence of what we're calling the new being is automatically the solution to all of our problems anyway. But to whatever the degree that it is, and I believe it has a role to play. Which role it has to play, I've yet to see, because I thought I already knew the answers to these questions. I realize I really don't. So my feeling is, I have a wait and see attitude. What I intend to do is create the conditions in which we'll make it possible for these evolutionary currents to flow as richly and as fully, as profoundly as possible. And then I want to see what's going to happen without already knowing. And I can feel in myself, my not already knowing is what's going to make it possible for the big new things to happen. Before I had figured out basically how the steps work, but I think I was overconfident about what I understood, what I thought I understood. And now I feel passionately about all the same ideas, but I feel much more cautious and less invested in what the outcome's going to be. But I want to create the conditions which allow the potential of the process to reveal itself. And I'm paying close attention to what's happening. So I'll be there to acknowledge it and to begin to guide it if I need to. But I don't think what we used to call the new being is the automatic solution to all of our problems anyway. I think collective enlightened intelligence has a role to play, I'm sure. But it's not as obvious to me what the role is now as it was to me 20 years ago. So I'm still very excited about all the same potentials, but I feel much more hesitant to be so sure. So I'm still looking for the same outrageous evolutionary potentials to reveal themselves, but I feel more cautious and more hesitant to be sure of how it's going to work. And I want to leave all the space in the world for this to unfold in ways that I don't even already I understand and know about myself. So in that, I'm feeling very cautious, while being as completely committed and as teaching as forcefully and as fully as I can. These teachings are scientific and they all work. So the degree to which people who start living the teachings on their own terms, these potentials will start to reveal and start to manifest themselves more and more spontaneously. And I want to create the conditions in which they'll emerge with less force than I used to. Because I saw what was possible, and I had to force people into these structures that I felt would give rise to these higher potentials, and they often did. So I'm shooting for the stars again, but I feel much more cautious and careful about it. And for me, being more cautious and careful will make me aware of what wants to happen versus what I think should happen. And that's what I'm very excited about, because I'm ready to see what consciousness has in mind. But I feel a healthy reluctance to be overconfident. So I'm trying to hold the balance in myself between super inspiration and not being so sure, and seeing what's going to emerge. Because if we're overconfident about how we think this is supposed to unfold, should unfold, will unfold, we won't see what maybe wants to unfold in a very different way. I don't know. But that's more or less my position. That's why I want to heal, because I needed to put more work into this. When I was at the hospital, I just had open heart surgery, unexpectedly. And I was in the hospital, and this woman, when I was in the ICU, I had 2 surgeries because the first one messed up. There was this very wonderful woman who was the head of the ICU. And she said, I prayed 3 hours for you during your surgery. It was absolutely, unbelievably beautiful. A lot of people were praying for me that I didn't know, and I didn't know why they were doing that. So throughout the whole process, I was in the hospital, I felt this strange feeling of being protected. that I couldn't explain. But to be honest, my time in the hospital was actually quite glorious. I mean, you don't want to have open heart surgery, believe me. It's a terrible violation of your body and your soul. But on some metaphysical level, there was a sense of being cared for. That was very intoxicating and very strange. And I never was afraid. I got afraid when I went home. But I never experienced any fear because I had a feeling that everything was going to be okay. So one thing that I've changed my opinion about is this idea of fully enlightened. So in an evolving universe, the universe of becoming, we can always become more of anything. We're all works in progress. We're all part of an evolutionary process. So there's no fully anything because there's always more as possible, including enlightenment is a moving train. Some people are more enlightened than others. That's obvious. But fully enlightened in an evolving cosmos doesn't make any sense more. If we lived in a static universe, we could define what it means to be fully enlightened in a way that makes rational sense. When we realize we're in an evolving cosmos, there's no final arrival, there's no final attainment for any of us. We're all works in progress. And from this perspective, even the Buddha was a work in progress. All the greatest realizers were highly realized, but they were still works in progress.